Welcome to Nextcasts, where we take you on a thrilling journey into the heart of innovation, urban development, and the future of our bustling cities. I'm your host, Emilia, CEO of Swissnex in San Francisco, and this is the METROPOLIS season. Good morning and welcome to this new episode of the METROPOLIS Nextcast podcast season. Today we are here with Anna and Axel from the MacIver-Ek Chevroulet office, an architecture office. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
So let's start by, maybe just introducing yourself. Can you tell us who you are, what you do, Anna and Alex?
Yes, so my name is Anna MacIver-Ek, and with Axel, we co-founded the office MacIver-Ek Chevroulet, I think about 3 years ago now. And at the same time, we're also both teaching as professors at the Berner Fachhochschule, so in Switzerland, in the city of Bern. And we also are part of a collective called La Clique, which is a collective of 15 people. There we're active in the domains of architecture, but also art and installation, also like socially minded structures that are often in public space as well. So we have this kind of, I guess, quite mixed background, sort of in research, in action, in large scale, small scale. I would say we work in like all of these fields.
So I'm Axel. I'm from Neuchâtel, actually, so the French part of Switzerland. And I grew up in Neuchâtel, but then I went to study architecture first at EPFL, then in Copenhagen in Denmark, where actually I've met Anna, and then finished my studies in Zurich. And since then, we've been working a bit abroad, but mostly now we have our main office in Zurich and also a smaller office in Lausanne. But I think, Anna, I will let you speak because your background is much broader.
Not necessarily. I was born in Sweden, but my father's from Sweden, my mother's from Denmark, and then we moved around a lot when I was a child, so I wouldn't say that I have a very specific place where I live or where I come from. I was quite mixed, my background, and before studying architecture, I did a bachelor in business, language and culture in Copenhagen. And that's where we met, actually. I had just finished my bachelor and I was working at a film festival there. And then, I sort of switched directions, I guess, and got into architecture and studied in Switzerland then. So first in Mendrisio and then in Zurich. So also in like different cantons, different language regions of Switzerland, which is really nice.
So you are a Swiss Scandinavian architecture office. Can you tell us more about this? What are like the similarities between the architecture styles, main differences?
It's a good question.
Is it a topic for you?
I don't know.
I think so, because I think recently, in the past few years, we had also been involved in projects in Denmark, in Copenhagen, kind of by chance, or maybe through people we had met in the studies. And so it has been always the possibilities, or the occasion to kind of reflect about the similarities and the differences between these two places. And we don't have like a perfect answer to this, but at least to me, what I would notice as the main difference, or what I guess we are sometimes craving or appreciating in what happens in Scandinavia, is very much this focus on the public space and this ability of really, I think Scandinavian have a really great strength in actually activating public spaces, creating programs or placing programs that involve a wide array of people, and that can really maybe transform spaces that could be quite difficult into successful, vibrant places of exchange also. And I think on the other side, when we talk to our friends who are mostly located in Scandinavia, when they look in Switzerland, I think what they're really looking up to is the fact that in Switzerland the architecture scene kept a very central place, I would say. and the architects still have also a lot of freedom and control on the project. I think it's one of the last countries in the world where the architect is involved in the building process from the beginning all the way to the end, which means that we have to kind of the responsibility of the construction site all the way to the end, which is a huge responsibility. It's sometimes a lot of headaches, but it's also what ensures that you can really make sure that, even the small decisions, the small constructive decisions, you have something to say about them, and it really has a huge influence on the quality, I think, at the end.
Yeah, it's true. I think also in Denmark and Sweden there was this kind of I think the height of the architecture scene in the 20th century was sort of in like the 50s, 60s, with sort of there was Arne Jacobsen, Finn Juhl, Jan Utzon, Sverre Fehn, all this. There was sort of this era, also like Leverance, they were really sort of at the pinnacle of architecture, I guess. And since then, I think they're struggling a little bit to find their voice also, because it's a very heavy heritage they have. Like, it's very strong. It's really all, because a lot of them also got into like design as well, sort of like furniture design or smaller pieces. So it became something that was ubiquitous. Everybody has these pieces in their house, or they have this, they grow up with it kind of, it's everywhere around you. So it's kind of it's almost a bit heavy. You really feel this like weight of the previous masters maybe still in the society. So the architecture scene is maybe, there's this difficulty of like breaking free from this. Whereas in Switzerland, I think there was less this kind of like, there's always been, there's this Le Corbusier, I guess, of course. he never left. He'll probably stay for another 200
Still
years. 200 years talking about Le Corbusier. But I think there was a bit more freedom in Switzerland. From the way I understand it. I don't know.
Mm.
Okay. I was talking to a Swiss designer last week, and she was here in the US, and she was telling me, Switzerland is not doing good by representing, its design tradition abroad. We just hear about Scandinavian design, and we don't hear anything anymore about Swiss design. What would you say?
But, yeah, it's true. I mean, Swiss design is also, it's very well respected, especially in the fields of like typography or graphic design. It's like one of the biggest countries, with like maybe Holland or something. It's insanely important. Like most of just if you look at like the SBB or like the CFF, the whole design that was developed out of this, which is also like somehow a basis for like a lot of like like signage all around the world. Like it became really the standard in a way, like how to lead people through a space and things like that. So it's true. I think it's still very respected, but maybe they don't talk about it as much. Maybe I feel the respect there still.
But I think it's kind of refreshing to hear that, or what you were saying, because for architecture, we have the feeling it's kind of the opposite. Swiss architecture tends to be overrepresented all globally. I mean, it's incredible how a small country like Switzerland, its architecture is exported everywhere, which is great on one side. But when you are an architect in Switzerland, you tend sometimes also to lose a bit of this richness of, just keeping your eyes open to what's happening abroad and in other places. And so, I think sometimes it's also quite good for a designer or for an architect not to feel like you're the center of the world, I think.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. Talking about Swiss architects going abroad, you will be coming to San Francisco with your project for the 20th anniversary of Swissnex. Can you tell us more? The project is called the Pétanque Renanaise. Could you explain us a little bit what is it about? What is so special about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, it's a building that we've small competition that we won last year, and so it's a public building for the city of Renan. That's next to Lausanne, so in the French side of Switzerland, and it's a building basically for boule club, so this sport pétanque, we were really excited about this project, and we thought it was relevant for Swissnex actually, because we've been able through this project, also mainly because the city of Renan actually, they are incredibly courageous and they're really pushing actually to innovate. And so we've been able to experiment with a lot of building techniques on different levels that allow us to kind of discover or try to apply actually quite radical sustainability solutions. So that's why I think from a small project, kind of boulodrome that might appear actually, maybe it's not like a school or kind of, I don't know, town hall or something like this, but it's still a public building with a relative size. So it's about 500-600 square meters. First, we are able to actually, really kind of open new ways of construction, which for us is actually really thrilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for us, one of the main things that we're really excited about with the project as well, that the whole load-bearing structure of the building is made out of reused concrete. So it's not recycled concrete, which is something completely different, where you sort of take existing concrete, you grind it up using a lot of energy, a lot of great energy, and then you reconstitute it into new concrete. Like reused concrete is really like taking pieces of concrete as they are, cutting them, and then reusing them again in the same form. So essentially there was a building about 2 kilometers away that our engineer knew about. He knew that it was going to be destroyed. And instead of destroying the building, there was an idea of like deconstructing the building, basically. So you cut it up into like pieces that then can be reused. And so our project was then one of the projects that was used where they were going to use this reused concrete. So essentially they cut the slab, so like the horizontal floor slabs, into pieces, and we then transported it about 2 kilometers, so a really short distance, to the construction site. And where we're now going to be using it, so we're going to take these horizontal slabs, turn them vertical, and then they're going to be used as a load-bearing structure.
How did you come up with this idea? Did you know that this building was about to be destroyed, or how?
No, actually, our engineer was the one that knew about the building that was going to be destroyed, and he was somehow active. He knew the people who were doing it, which is a construction company, and somehow through this he was able to also find different projects, somehow like use this building as a resource essentially that could then somehow fund or like be used for different projects that were happening around the same time through his network. Some of it went to EPFL, some of it went to Fribourg. So like it was quite interesting. Like, I mean, the other projects were much more sort of like small scale pavilions or like a wall or something, and ours was the one that was really like a public building that will stay and that will be like really built. It was the only project that was using the concrete in this way.
And I guess for us, it's always, as an architecture office, the question of concrete is quite a big question. Of course, Switzerland it has a great tradition in it, but when you know that the construction industry is responsible nowadays for 40% of the CO2 emissions, and that concrete is actually one of the materials that produces the most of CO2 within these processes, it's not as much a reflex anymore as architects to use concrete. And more and more, when you build, you think, okay, how can we avoid this, or how can you actually find ways, because you cannot always avoid concrete because it's so actually practical in terms of structure, in terms of resistance to water and everything. Durability. And so the fact of actually being able to develop this new technique of reusing this concrete, saving, I think it's more than 95% of the CO2 through this, was actually really a kind of game changer for us to realize, actually we can still use concrete, but we just have to actually rethink the way we use it in order to still make sense out of it.
Mm-hmm. So no concrete is not a very good news for the heritage of Le Corbusier, right? I guess.
Well, I mean, we could start cutting it up.
That's true. Is that? I mean, Anna, you made this difference between reusing and recycling. Is that why you call your project radical sustainability, or because I was surprised to hear this word, like it's a radical sustainability, so it means that it's going further than sustainability. Could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, I think for us, there's this notion of all projects nowadays have to deal with sustainability to a certain extent. And there are some solutions that are kind of maybe ready-made, and also solutions that you apply at the end. You know, you design your whole project, And then at the end, you add this kind of layer of sustainability on it. You add some solar panels on the roof, you add some more insulation, and then you can say it's sustainable.
You add some wood on the facade,
exactly,
on top of the concrete that you just poured.
And I guess for us, it's this question: how can for sustainability is something that should come right at the start of the project. You have to start the project by thinking, how can we make it sustainable? That's also actually the way we are teaching in Bern. It's kind of sustainability is actually the trigger for the project almost. And so, for instance, using reused concrete forced us to completely change the way we designed, because suddenly we had to decide on the size of the elements, because the existing building was being demolished. We had just started the design of the boulodrome.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to take executive decisions at a way earlier stage than what architects would usually do. And we had to then challenge the way we were usually designing. So what went actually from a crisis at the beginning became actually quite fun to realize it's like a huge Lego. You draw a size, it becomes your brick. It was 2 by 4 meters, so it's actually a very big brick. And then you have to deal with the consequences. So it becomes very fun actually in a way. And so you realize that by adopting these kind of strategies, it's deeply that you have to rethink your job as an architect. And it was the same.
That was my next question. I was thinking, I mean, does that mean that, the architect who had just like a blank page and was just drawing things coming from his mind, that this job is going to change and is going to become more of a, I like the analogy of the Lego player. I think that's a good one to, understand what does it mean to be circular.
Yeah, I definitely think that architects, I always say that architecture is also a lot about being curious. And I think this kind of, the use of the curiosity is going to be more and more important, because you're going to have to be curious about wanting to, like, also keeping your ears and eyes open about opportunities, like you have to be, if you hear that this building is being destroyed, maybe you then as an architect also take the step to speak to the people, find the owner, why are you destroying it? Could we use it differently? Could we do something else to it? So that the architect also starts to become a bit more of an active player in this whole process. Instead of just like waiting for projects to come to you or for like ideas to come to you. You're kind of like just seeing opportunities and you're somehow seeking them out. Maybe seeing if you can play a role and change the fate of certain places, buildings. I think that there's definitely like a kind of switch that's happening with regards to this kind of reuse. Like we've heard as well a lot, like the amount of buildings, especially if we talk about, for example, Europe. We mostly know this context just because that's where we're working, but there's already enough built stock to last us for the next 100 years. We don't need to actually build anything more. There are so many things that are empty or underused, for example, in the countryside, there are loads of things that are abandoned, and then cities are becoming more dense, and yet we just build new things in the city and we leave the things that are decaying to decay even more. There are certain ways of like redistribution, like it's much more of a kind of more global way of seeing things. Like you can't just sit and then only think about your idea and then you talk to companies and they produce something for you and then that becomes a project. I think there's new structures, new networks being created.
So there is enough built structure in Europe for the next 100 years? Is that what you said?
I think there are some research being made at the moment. I think one of the leading figure in this is Charlotte Malterbart, who's actually a professor now at EPFL. And they're actually questioning the need actually to make new structures. And so they're really analyzing the build stock, and analyzing how much is empty and actually how much square meter is needed. And actually it always shows that we have actually enough square meters to host all of the activities we have. So actually it's not only about building new, but it's also about using what we already have in a better way.
Yeah.
We have another guest in this podcast, Arabelle de Saussure, working at ETH, and her work is about creating this platform where people working in construction could kind of put all the elements of the buildings that are being destroyed, or it's also, I think it's even a digital automated process. and so that architect could somehow go on this. We called it during the podcast the Facebook market for construction, so to say, or the eBay for construction. And it's I think resonating a little bit to your work. I was wondering what were your challenges when you built this building?
Yeah,
Everywhere.
yeah, that's true. That's very true. Because on one side, when we thought about this idea, we have an image. When we were we were in a Zoom call with our engineer, and then the moment that this idea came to use them as walls, as the load-bearing structure, suddenly we were like, oh, it's actually we will finally be building a building the way that we thought construction was working when we were 5 years old. Like it's super naive in a way and so simple. And so after this, you get super optimistic and you think it's so clear that we will not have any problem. But then, as Anna said, you realize how actually even a very simple idea that in a structural way actually works very well, actually challenges the whole building industry because it's not ready for it. It's not meant for it. So basically the questions about warranties, how do you make sure that the concrete follows the norms or is strong enough? You can very easily make tests to show that it's strong enough, but how do you convince people? Or, there are no norms, there's not like a pre-made path for it, so you kind of have to make it yourself. It's a public building, so how do you convince then the city that they have to pay to get old concrete instead of getting new concrete? It's a whole almost like pedagogical process. And even at the end, when everyone is convinced and they're like, yes, let's do it, and then you have to pay for the concrete plates, and they're like, oh, actually, we are only allowed to pay like once we've voted the building budget, which actually will arrive in 1 year. So we cannot pay for them now. And you're like, well, what do we do then? And then they have to kind of turn around their whole administrative department to find a way to make it. You realize how many actually barriers there are. And it's actually, I mean, of course, it's a lot of effort, but it's also very exciting to see, also because that's what is amazing with this city, is that when people believe in an idea and there really everyone is on the same page, you can really turn all these things around. That's maybe the first time you talk about them, they're like, no, it's not possible.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, where there's a will, there's a way. I think it's very true, especially for public projects, because things, they're not impossible, they're just politically very complicated. And for example, there we've also had the experience that the city architect that we're working with is also very, also like in a way politically active, like also understands these processes and what's needed to change them. I think it's not always a given that every city wants to have a city architect that's also like willing to go this extra step and also to try and convince people on behalf of the architects or on behalf of the whole construction team, let's say the engineers. I think that's definitely something.
Can you say a couple of words about the costs? Is the process, is it like more costly or the same?
Yeah, we were discussing this today. We were also like trying to theorize whether we thought that the price of reused concrete would go down over time or go up, because I guess in terms of economics, kind of like supply and demand, but also just availability of it, because of course there's a lot of it, and so we were wondering whether actually in the future, I was theorizing that maybe in the future it might become more expensive, and Axel was saying that it might become cheaper. But for the moment, the deal that we got was that it basically cost the same amount as to make new concrete. And we were saying that we had the feeling, seeing as the company that was doing this, they were sort of a little bit reticent. They haven't really done it before. It was a little bit experimental. I think they were kind of erring on the side of caution of how much it would cost them to cut these slabs up. In the future, I think if companies have done it many times, they also optimize their processes. They optimize they understand exactly how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, and I think then prices will start to stabilize a little bit. But we were also talking about whether, for example, if like taxes on trash will increase, because at the moment something that's really interesting for the companies that are destroying them is that actually it's cheaper because it's very expensive to bring such heavy material to the trash or like to recycle it somehow. It's quite an expensive cost, and so that you remove, let's say, like you say, we take it from you, we transport it to wherever we're going to take it, and you don't need to pay to like somehow get rid of all this stuff in a safe way, as safe as that can be. So you're kind of saving money in a way for whoever owns it or whoever's destroying it. In that sense, like you're taking, let's say, A, like logistics, and B, costs off of their side. Then at the same time, I was wondering if it starts to also become, let's say, like a wanted material, like because if let's say norms change on the construction side and they say that you need to build with reused concrete, then maybe there'll be such a demand for reused concrete that they will be able to then increase the prices because it's a lot to do with legislation often. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, you still don't agree?
No.
No, because I think
it's not actually economics. Huh?
no, but I think that on this project, it's already incredible that to use it as a load-bearing structure, which has, is somehow so experimental in a way that we get the same price as actually just making new concrete. That's quite a victory for us. I think it already shows that it's actually pertinent for cities to do it. And I'm really sure it's going to go down the price because on one side, the politics, they have pressure and they have to increase the taxes on waste. You cannot just let people like fill the waste grounds with material infinitely. You have to kind of start to make people reuse the materials. And also, as soon as this process becomes more developed, we've seen in our project the way they've been cutting the concrete. It's beautiful, but they have this. They did it with like such a small saw. There's no optimized tool to do this. And when you pour new concrete, you see everything is like perfectly made to be as efficient as possible. But nowadays, we are still kind of inventing and kind of trying out stuff. And I'm sure in 5 or 10 years, when it becomes more spread around, the companies will be much more prepared and they will have much more efficient tools to actually do this process.
Yeah, a new industry, a new upcoming industry somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we zoom out a little bit now from your individual project, I was wondering if you could describe us your vision of the future city. How should it look like?
I think for us, something that's interesting, like a future city, I think we hear a lot of talk about this kind of idea of the smart city, like the cities that suddenly know everything about you or that adapt themselves to you. And I think we still see a lot of potential in more like a low-tech future, like also sort of like being able to, for example, I think having cities that have this richness of layers of the past that you somehow like reuse things, reuse buildings, repurpose them, change them. These cities that somehow build upon their past and don't forget about it, but somehow they still change the direction. I see like a future for this much more than maybe like cities that overly rely on technology to somehow solve like existing problems in cities. Because I don't really have the feeling that kind of like surveillance and data collection and things like that about people is really going to be. I don't know. Maybe I'm too conservative about it, but I have the feeling that it's there are also many things that can be done with the existing, but just by like looking at things in a different way.
But I think it goes a bit in the direction you were saying before, in your question about how does it change the job of the architect. It's less about building cities where you control everything from the start to the end, and where if you build a new building, you get rid of what was before and you make it brand new. But it's about a city where you have these different times of history that start to accumulate on top of one another and start to communicate with one another. So you have this kind of depth of time that really appears, and I think that's much more rich also as environments for humans to live in. I also think there's a huge progress to be made in the way also that the different, like I think this is something that we are starting to be aware of, but how we've been sealing surfaces, sealing the ground for so long, and how we can actually start to open up the ground, let the water run in again, actually use trees not as enemies that deform the roads, but trees as, making us able to breathe within the cities. I think also this kind of synergies and symbiosis between the built and natural environments is something that will develop very strongly in the future, and that will be really improve the qualities of urban environments.
So what are your thoughts when there is a case here in California about a group of investors who want to build a new city from the ground, from the scratch? What are your thoughts about this type of project?
I think we've seen the project. No, I've showed it to you not so long ago.
Yeah. They had the kind of this very idyllic looking city,
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, yeah. I think also this, it's very easy to think of this idea of like the tabula rasa, like you have this perfect empty land, and then you build whatever you want, and it's somehow your dream in a way, like, which is a dream of, let's say, a certain group of people for a certain period of time. It's not necessarily, let's say, a reality that's accessible for everyone. Like I have the feeling that, I've never been to San Francisco, but I read about it, etc., and things like that. I also have the feeling that maybe it's also worth concentrating on existing cities and also seeing how they can be developed. I'm sure San Francisco has areas of the city or things that can be still improved, that can be rethought. Like if these same investors would put as much, let's say, time and energy into like improving San Francisco as building their dream in the desert somewhere, then maybe there would be, maybe I'm being a bit too provocative, but maybe that would also be something a little bit more worthwhile and probably a bit more difficult and much more difficult to sell, because maybe it's more like incremental measures that take longer time and are not so visible maybe, but are very useful for the population. So it's difficult. It's a difficult sell, I guess, as an investor, but probably more durable in the long term.
Mm-hmm. And probably something that is difficult for us, at least in Switzerland, to understand, because I think we wouldn't have the land to do something like that.
No, for sure. It's I lived in the Middle East as well for quite a long time in Oman, and there it's of course the very similar themes coming up. Investors also have this dream of a certain reality at a certain period of time, and then they build some kind of mad like city somewhere maybe completely unrelated to an existing city, and they somehow think if I build it, then everyone will come and they want to stay here. And most of the time, these schemes don't work. It's, at least in the Middle East, it's really not it's not durable in a way, because people then don't really know why am I here? What is this place? Like it's sort of just sprung up out of nowhere. Like what binds people together in these kinds of cities? Is it just their social status, or what's the aim of these kinds of cities? I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
No, I think things grow slowly also. Like you don't build a city. If you build a city out of nothing in a few years, it's the same actually at different scales. Even if you build a new building out of nothing, for 10 years or for 5 years, it's a new building. But then after 10 years, it becomes one of these, it's like the teenage time. No, it becomes this kind of not so nice time where no one wants to live in this building anymore. The same with these cities. It's like, it was the new thing 10 years ago. And actually, cities that have been there for 100 years, 200 years. In Switzerland, of course, we talk almost about millennia, so even more than that sometimes. You really have this kind of, you have so many, such a big depth that has grown. That actually you have this quality, you have this culture, you have something that will create actually an attraction that will not die. So that's why I think even if it's, as Anna was very rightly saying, it's much more difficult to act in this existing environment, but you invest your money into something that actually will last for a long time, and it will not just be the new thing that you try to sell as quickly as possible to get your money, and then you escape because it's gonna kind of decay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think this element of also like why cities are in certain places. They're usually also very linked to very like strong pragmatic links. Why a certain settlement sprung up in a certain place. If you go back a very long time. Often it was linked to like very base needs, sources of water, protection maybe from within the landscape, a specific placement in the landscape where they could then see enemies and things like that. And I think today, if you start to just like build cities, I mean, we no longer, let's say, have this kind of very primal needs like water, power, whatever. We get another pipe and we'll get some water here. It'll be fine. Like people somehow don't see the value in this. Like, oh, we don't have any enemies. No one's going to come and attack us. Like we don't need a hill. Like it's fine. We could you have this idea that you can make like a utopian society wherever you want. And I think that would work if then you have a group of people that also like really want to make this work. Like I mean, they have kind of this like drop city. Like America has quite a strong culture of these kind of like communities that sprung up in kind of utopian societies in the desert, kind of self-built and things like that. There's a really strong culture of this in the US, but that was because the people that were there were wanting to make this thing there. They decided by themselves and they would live there and they would take care of it, let's say. Whereas if it's an investor that's just building something and then, okay, you can come live here if you have enough money, not a very strong link, I guess.
Probably the importance of like bottom-up processes and having a community supporting this type of project, I guess.
Yeah, very much.
If you think about the biggest challenges for future cities, what would they be?
I think to avoid overheating so that people can't live there anymore. I have the feeling, I mean, now Zurich, it's not a city that is I would say you wouldn't really classify it as a very warm city, but there are really long periods of the year in the summer already now where you start to feel these, like, it's pretty unbearable to be in the city already now. I mean, the climate change, we're feeling it quite acutely. And I really have the feeling, at least in my opinion, it's one of the main themes if people are still going to want to actually live in cities. Like, is there a way to keep them physically livable for the foreseeable next 100, 200 years, which if you want to make investments in a city in general, it's quite expensive. Land costs are more expensive. Processes are more expensive. So you don't want to make an investment in something that you'll only be able to use for 50 years or something, and then it's too hot, and then everyone has to leave and go live in the countryside or by the seaside. Like cities need long-term investment because it's big investments generally that you need for large parts of the population. So I have the feeling like to really assure this future, to keep investments coming, I think for me it's a really important theme. Like how do we open up, as Axel was saying, like open up the ground again, like stop this kind of over collection of heat, creating these heat islands in cities where on a hot day you just can't be there. You have to leave, you have to jump in the water or something.
Yeah, and I think as you were saying, in Switzerland, like 10 or 15 years ago, we were only talking about how much insulation you need to put on your building not to be cold in winter. And today, like we have some building applications in process, and the main questions we receive is like, how do you ensure that people are not too hot in summer? So you really see in the span of 15 years, you see like the paradigm has completely changed. And what I think, it's a huge challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity. And I think as architects, it's easy to complain and to say that we're in a crisis and to say, there are so many challenges in front of us. But it's also actually, I think, great opportunities for a profession to actually have like real constraints to answer to and real challenges to answer to, and to do it actually through really simple means. I think there are a lot of new answers that come, or new parameters that come into the way we design building, which are really nice. For instance, just taking into the consideration when you make like a neighborhood or something like this, where is the wind coming? How do you let the wind blow through the neighborhood? How do you make sure that this kind of, in the nights, the whole neighborhood can cool down? Yeah, where's the shade? How do you make sure that when it rains, you can make the most of this rain? That it really stays in the ground, that it cools down the whole area around it, and that you just, as we used to do, like put it as quickly as possible in pipes and get rid of it. And all these things are so simple. They are really, for me, it allows us also to almost come back to the basic questions of architecture, and I think it's really beautiful.
It's interesting. It's exactly the point that we were making before about putting in settlement where a couple of basic needs can be covered, that you actually somehow come back to this, to this way of building. Maybe a last question would be, what everyday change can people implement to contribute to a more sustainable urban future? Do you have any tip?
It's a hard one. I don't know.
I think maybe our position on this, we were talking about bottom-up before, and I think, of course, bottom-up processes are huge, have a huge power, but in terms of sustainability, I think we tend, I guess you agree with me, but you can also, I don't know, but I think it's also one place where we tend to put a lot of pressure on the individual and say people have to stop eating meat, people have to stop going on holidays and everything. And of course, it will make a difference. But I think it's also the place where, or the subject on which industries and governments also have to show the way, lead the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Switzerland, that has the chance and so to be in a country in a very good situation, is the type of country that really should show the way that with strong policies, you can actually really start to make change that have a real impact on society. So on this one, I think it's mostly maybe for this one we should also believe that the top down can have a strong effect, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I think they will probably have a stronger effect than the individual really can. I think I do agree with you that there's a very unnatural pressure put on the individual to solve, also the kind of burden of guilt and the burden of having to solve that. You get both somehow. When it was a society that led people to becoming these kinds of consumers, let's say, it was certain forces that sort of told people to want these things, and now we're telling them, no, you shouldn't want these things. That's terrible. Why are you such a bad person? So it's true. I couldn't say, maybe there's this acting on a more political level is sort of what the individual should be and can really have enforced, especially in Switzerland with direct democracy.
That's true.
There's very much this kind of bottom-up processes with a top-down effect have their place in Switzerland. The form of protest or demonstration, things like that. That's lucky in Switzerland. There's an extremely open culture towards this. Yeah, not all countries in the world have this.
So a call to action to policymakers and people to go to vote, I guess.
Yes,
yeah.
Very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anna and Axel. Thank you so much for participating to this podcast, Nextcast podcast, our Metropolis edition. Thank you for all those insights about the future of cities, about how we can be more sustainable, how we can be radically sustainable. And we wish you have a good day. And thank you for participating.
Thank you. You too, Emilia.
This episode was part of the Metropolis season, where we celebrate Swissnex in San Francisco's 20th anniversary. Find out more about the anniversary and upcoming events by Swissnex in San Francisco in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode and see you at one of our upcoming events.